You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. Michael Cauble, our buddy from WBRZ, was there on Saturdays with us now. How are you, Cobbs?
Doing well. Yeah, man. Took me back to my days as an intern and hanging around at the Ponderosa after practice to get interviews on the field. I think that was the last time we got to watch a full practice.
When was the last? I mean, was it 99? I guess had to be, right? I mean, Jerry D in 99?
Yeah, for sure. Back then, yeah, that was the plan, right? You'd go back out there, you'd watch practice, and then you just stick around and get the player interviews right there on the field when they were walking off. It was nuts.
That's incredible. It's just a different world, man. It's a different world.
But I will say it wasn't like, the secrets of heaven were like revealed on Saturday either. It was basically an extended stay of what we kind of get to see with a little bit more, a little bit more fun sprinkled throughout. So we'll talk about it.
So, yeah, it was the fifth practice of the first spring of a new coach. I don't think exactly. We weren't expecting to see, the annexation of Puerto Rico, right? I mean, let's get real about. That's a Little Giants reference for those that don't get it. Okay, so if I said, what was your overarching takeaway before we get into the nuance, what would you say?
Yeah, I think the disparity of talent. I feel like and that was the thing that struck me the most. Getting to watch it for an extended period of time was that you have some high end guys that you can tell can be difference makers, but you also have some really low-level players that you probably haven't seen on rosters in the past, right? That might be the nicest way to say it.
So go a little deeper. I mean, you don't necessarily need to call anybody out, but explain a little bit.
You're just looking at guys that don't fill out the uniform to some degree. You're looking at 6 feet and under in a lot of positions that have been 6 feet and over. You're looking at guys that might be a step slower, the guys that can't run when it's receiver corner drills with each other, separation, those kinds of things. So I think you're seeing a little bit of a talent deterioration. Now, granted, it is the spring and they have a lot to figure out right now, and maybe that is the reason for some of that. Of course, they get a phone call right now, right? And so
there's a guy in LaDainian Tomlinson TCU jersey walking out front of the restaurant.
I just gotta let that ring. Sorry.
That's fine.
But that's the idea, that I'm seeing out there. That's what I did. That's what I took away from this weekend. It was like, man, you got some dudes like Brian Thomas that's really going to be a player, and then you've got some other guys that you got to figure it
out. Quarterbacks. What were your takeaways?
That Jaden Daniels has a long way to go, and this thing isn't as close as I think as I thought it was before I watched.
Okay. What was his biggest shortcoming?
He just can't throw a tight ball. The one interception I saw, or the one spiral I saw him throw, was an interception. Everything else was struggling to get there, not very accurate. Now, granted, I don't know how much of what they wanted him to do was tuck and run in some of these drills, but in some situations you're like, man, why are you running the ball right here? So, just a little bit of separation, I'd say. I would say Miles was not clearly, but certainly in front, right? And then I would say maybe even Garrett was there in second. Okay. Jaden just didn't look like I think a quarterback should look, right? Now, maybe that is different when they have a play call, designed for him. And certainly we know his skill set is different from Miles in that, he has some maneuverability about him. And it's early, right? I don't want to alarm anyone, but I thought he would be a little bit further along, more developed, I guess is the best way to say it.
He's on Twitter at Cauble, Cauble. First of all, how was the practice structured as far as like when you got to watch 11 on 11? Was it like a game-like scenarios?
It was. And I think this was interesting because Brian Kelly talked about it after practice. He wanted it to be more intense than it was, and we all thought it was going to be full tackle, go to the ground, and it wasn't. It was pass rush, pass blocking. They were I would say about 85-90% effort, but everything else seemed like they were certainly keeping everyone up, keeping them off the ground, that kind of thing. The practice as a whole was interesting, and this is what was interesting to me, and not having anything to compare it to in the past. It was interesting in that they would go individual, they would go somewhat team, and then they would break back to individual. So and looking at it now, it makes a lot of sense in that they don't want to wear anyone out. But it was interesting in that they would do like some individual drills, and they would get together and do some 7-on-7, and then they would do some special teams drills for I'd say a fairly lengthy couple of periods, and then they would get back and then they would do some 11-on-11, or they would do offense defensive line 1-on-1. So it was interesting in the way that it was structured, because you could clearly see where they weren't trying to overtax anyone, and they wanted to get them all through a practice. And like I said, the last 3 periods I think were supposed to be full go. And Brian Kelly afterwards says they just couldn't do it. They didn't have, I don't know if it was the numbers at key positions. He didn't really allude to why, but he's like, you guys could tell it wasn't the full intensity that we wanted.
What about on the offensive line? I mean, they're replacing 4 starters. Anybody standing out there?
I'll say this, man. Cardell Thomas, as much as I was expecting him to look terrible, he looked pretty good. Now, again, I don't know if that's based on where I was expecting him to look. When you look at him, he just looks loose, right, in his makeup, but he was holding his own. Will Campbell, I think if he puts 10 more pounds on and gets, in the books, I think that dude is just ready to roll. I mean, He really, really does fill it out. And then some other guys, like I think Xavier Hill surprised me. They all had moments, right? Like that was the thing. You can kind of see the makings of, okay, like they have a shot here. Like they're blocking some pretty good dudes that are going up against them, and they're doing it relatively easily. But then they would also just have a whiff, or get spun. And so it was more good than bad, and I think that was a positive takeaway for me, because I was expecting the opposite of that. So I was a little impressed with what I saw out of that position. But that's the thing, man. It just felt so hard to tell based on the guys that they had out there, the ones that you think are coming, maybe some guys that aren't necessarily healthy, and then just what is this thing going to look like when you put it all together? It's very much a work in progress, as you would expect, 5 into 15 practices, right?
Yeah, completely agree. What about the newcomers? You mentioned Will Campbell. I think 17 mid-year enrollees from transfers, obviously a storyline there as well. Are any of the transfers catching your eye? Yeah, go ahead.
Joe Fuchsia, I guess, is hard to miss. It seems like just whether it be position or need, it seems like he was in the mix a lot. I remember, looking at my roster sheet and being like, all right, who's this dude again? Here he is, 13. Okay. Just seeing him around a lot of good, competition, I guess, from him. And that was kind of the thing. That's what I was talking about. Like, some dudes looked the part, and then other guys were clearly overmatched, right? And just like you look and you're like, wait, what? And then you see it's like freshman, It's like, okay. I would say he was probably the one that stood out most, because he's more individualized. There wasn't anyone. I mean, if you were to throw a name at me, it might ring a bell. But I didn't see anyone that was really like, holy crap, look at that dude, right?
Okay.
Other than Brian Thomas. Like I think, at one point I was like, man, they're going to build this offense around Brian Thomas, because he's just effortless in what he does, right? Separation speed, catch radius, the things that he's managed to, craft his body into. I think that was impressive to me, and he kind of stood out.
That is interesting, because it feels like we've heard more. I feel like I've heard Brian Kelly talk more about Chris Hilton than any of the wide receivers, because just the impressive skill set. Focused defensively, we've heard a lot about Mason Smith. Anybody else there in the front 7 that caught your eye?
Well, Jaquelin Roy wasn't at practice, so Jacobian Guillory was getting most of those reps, and he looked good, but it was one of those deals where, again, can you really tell what you're getting? Are these 2 good guys going at each other, or 2 medium guys going at each other? Either way, they're pretty evenly matched, so it didn't feel like one was winning versus the other, and it was hard to tell, is this guy, brother-in-law on him, or is he really, doing a good job with it? Quincy Wiggins is a guy that I think in 2 years will be a beast of a football player, but I think he's going to have to dedicate himself to college football. I think he's a guy that got to this position because he was better than everyone else at the high school level and maybe didn't have to go as hard as he is going to need to do right now. But if he commits to that, I think watch out. I mean, to me, he really is the Neil Hunter in the making. That's kind of who he reminded me of, watching him and just seeing him in high school. I mean, I think he's a little leaner right now. It looks like, that's going in the right direction. But as far as the defensive line, even linebackers, there wasn't anyone that really popped. No, and you just played the soundbite about the safety position. Jordan Tolles, kicked over to corner at that practice just to maybe see how it looks and with the help, with the depth. So there's a lot of holes. Tight end, I think, if I'm walking away as a glaring weakness, tight end is definitely a trouble spot. They've got two, and at one point, I think Denbrock, yelled, "You got feet for hands," at one of them. So it really is a little troubling to look at that, just knowing how much I think they would like to use that position in this offense.
All right, before you go, you mentioned Denbrock. Give me an observation watching the coaches for a full practice, since this is basically a new staff, save one guy.
I think it's exactly what you want if you're an LSU fan. You get a lot of coaching, a lot of teaching, and a lot of, I'd say, accountability after the rep, if that makes sense, right? Like it's a lot of, come here, talk to me. This is what you need to do. They're not waiting. They're not letting guys, low for lag. They're pointing it out in the moment. I thought that was good. A lot of good teachers. Cortez Hankton, really working with his receivers. I felt I was impressed by that, right? Not to say that we haven't seen that or heard that before. I think that's what all coaches do. I think that's what they should do, right? I just think it was good to see that reinforced there. I'm doing this today for my job, listening to the sound, and it is so boring because it is about the minutia, right? And getting basically the first 5 steps right so that you can continue with the next 6, 7, 8, 9 steps. It's very detail and process oriented, but again, it's where we are at this point of a new regime in a spring practice. You can't fast forward. Nothing's going to be decided in this spring. I think that's very clear. And I think this will be a take it up to game week preparation type situation for Brian Kelly and the 2022 Tigers for sure.
He is Michael Cauble on Twitter at Cauble, WBRZ Sports Director. Check him out. Cobbs, we appreciate a couple of minutes, man. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.